Picture a city that has decided it is the most beautiful thing in the world and then spent a full century making sure the rest of the world agrees. Now fill it with 2 million people living inside a painting. Add gaslight on wet cobblestones at midnight and the smell of hothouse lilies on top of open sewers and cafes where young men argue about beauty and desire until the chairs are put up around them. Add a secret that runs underneath all of it, threading through the salons and the back rooms and the covered passages of the arrondissements, invisible to anyone who doesn't know what they're looking for. That is Paris in 1890, the Belle Époque, the beautiful epoch, a city where Toulouse-Lautrec is painting the Moulin Rouge from a table 3 feet from the stage, short enough to watch the dancers' legs go by at eye level. A city where Oscar Wilde crosses the Channel every summer to be celebrated by people who would not have him in their homes back in London. A city where 17-year-old Marcel Proust is writing letters to boys he cannot stop thinking about. Letters full of metaphors and detours and everything except the one thing he is trying to say. A city where the Eiffel Tower has just gone up on the Champ de Mars, and half of Paris thinks it is a monstrosity, and half thinks it is the future, and both halves are correct. A city where you could be socially annihilated in a single afternoon by one word spoken in the wrong drawing room. And a city where, if you knew the signs, if you had been shown the door, you could find an entire world that polite Paris pretended did not exist, while polite Paris was quietly attending its parties. We're going back there tonight, not to look at the paintings or to romanticize absinthe on the boulevard. We are living it. 1 year, 1 person, 1 life spent navigating the most beautiful and most treacherous social terrain of the 19th century. The double life, the coded language, the terrifying daily performance of being someone you are not, in a city that is spectacular at performing things. I make these history stories, and honestly I do not know if you are sleeping, or if you are all just people who enjoy hearing about secret societies and the complicated business of being exactly who you are, in a place that will embrace you with both arms while quietly deciding whether to ruin you. Either way, get comfortable. Close your eyes. We are going in. Your eyes open to darkness. For a moment, maybe half a second, you have forgotten where you are. There is that floating sensation, that gap between sleep and waking, where nothing is required of you yet, where the world has not yet reasserted its rules. Then the smell hits you, not one smell. Several, layered the way you've learned Paris layers everything. Beauty on top of difficulty, on top of something older and darker underneath. The coal smoke from the poêle in the corner, still warm from last night but gone cold now, leaving that particular dry mineral smell that coats the back of your throat. The residue of someone else's tobacco on the curtains, because you bought this room furnished, and the previous tenant smoked a pipe every evening for what must have been years, and no amount of opening windows has gotten it out of the fabric. Boiled cabbage from the floor below, drifting up through the gaps in the floorboards at an hour when no person should be making that smell. The faint iron smell of the Seine, which reaches you even here on the Rue de Bac, because Montmartre sits above the city, but the river's presence is everywhere in Paris, in the damp and the cold and the particular weight of the air, and underneath all of it the smell of you, of a body that went to bed without washing because the water was cold and you were tired, of the anxiety sweat that came and went all through yesterday without you properly acknowledging it, of the pomade you use in your hair because appearance matters, because you have learned in the 14 months since you came to Paris from Bordeaux that appearance is one of the very few things you can control. Welcome to Paris, autumn 1890. You are 23 years old. You are lying on a narrow iron bed beneath 2 blankets, and your overcoat, because the landlady, Madame Rochard, controls the building's heat with the iron resolve of a general, and does not acknowledge winter until December, regardless of what the weather is doing. The mattress is thin enough that you can feel the springs if you roll wrong. The wallpaper is pale green with a faded yellow stripe, and peeling at the top corner near the window, which you've been meaning to glue back for 3 months without doing it. Your name is Edouard Pelletier. You came to Paris from Bordeaux in August of last year with 30 francs, a reference letter from your professor at the lycée, and a suitcase containing everything you owned that you were willing to be seen with. Your father is a notaire. Your mother plays piano on Sunday afternoons. Your sister has just married a man who deals in timber and thinks he's more important than he is. They all believe you are in Paris because of your ambitions, which is true in ways they cannot fully understand. Back in Bordeaux, everyone said Paris would make you or destroy you. They were not wrong. They just did not know which part of you it would be working on. The church at the top of the hill is ringing. Not Sacré-Cœur, not yet. The Sacré-Cœur is still being built, a great white confection of stone going up on the highest point of the butte, visible from half the city, controversial in the way that things are controversial in Paris, which is to say loudly and with political undertones. Construction has been going on since 1875. They say it will be decades more. Every morning you can hear the distant sound of hammering and see the scaffolding emerging from the mist above the rooftops. The church that is ringing right now is Saint-Pierre de Montmartre, one of the oldest churches in Paris, sitting in the shadow of the not yet finished basilica like a small elder watching the young one grow. Its bell is thin and clear, cracked slightly in the way that old bells crack, and you have learned its sound the way you learn the sound of a person's footstep in a house you have lived in long enough. 6 o'clock, which means you are late. You sit up fast and immediately regret it because the cold hits you like a thrown cloth, and your head swims slightly from standing up too quickly, and your neck is stiff from sleeping with your head at the wrong angle, because you were reading in bed again last night, which you know you should not do, and you did it anyway. Your feet find the floor. The wooden boards are the temperature of the inside of a well. You move quickly, because you have learned that moving quickly is the only way to get dressed in a cold room. Hesitation is what kills you. You hesitate, and the cold finds all the gaps, under your shirt, up your sleeves, and then you are just standing in the middle of your room, hating yourself and shivering. Your clothes are where you left them, folded over the chair. You have one suit that is suitable for office work. Dark wool, slightly worn at the elbows, but decent at a distance, which is how most things in your life are decent. A white shirt which you have washed and pressed yourself because you cannot afford to send laundry out more than once a week. A dark cravat that you tie in the mirror by touch now because you have done it so many times that your fingers know the shape of it before your eyes have focused. Your boots are the one extravagance you allowed yourself 6 months ago, when the Bordeaux boots you arrived with finally gave out in a March rainstorm and left you with wet feet for a week. These are proper Paris boots. They cost more than you had. You spent 2 weeks eating bread and cheese for dinner to balance the account. But they are good leather, resoled once already, and they fit properly. And when you walk into a room wearing them, you do not feel like someone who has just arrived from the provinces. In Paris, that matters. In Paris, how you are perceived in the first 8 seconds of walking into a room can determine everything about how the rest of the evening goes. You have spent 14 months learning this lesson in various painful ways. There is water in the basin from last night. You break the thin skin of ice on top with your knuckle, splash some on your face, dry off with the towel that hangs on the back of the door. The cold water drives the last of the sleep from your head and replaces it with a sharp animal clarity. Today is Thursday, which means you need to be at the editorial offices of Le Journal Illustré on the Rue Saint-Joseph by 7:30, because Monsieur Fléchard, your immediate superior, arrives at exactly 7:30 and expects his correspondence drafted before he sits down, and the one time you were not ready with it, he said nothing but looked at you in a way that you still think about sometimes. You work as a secretary and minor editorial assistant. You fetch, you write, you rewrite, you copy, you arrange. It is not what you imagined when you arrived in Paris with your reference letter and your 30 francs and your ambitions. But it is a salary. It is a desk. It is a reason to be in the city that you can explain to your father when he writes his monthly letters asking how things are going. Things are going fine, you tell him. Paris is wonderful. You are making contacts in the literary world. This is partially true. You close the door of your room quietly, because the man across the hall, a Belgian artist named Dupont who paints marine scenes that nobody buys, works nights and sleeps mornings and has opinions about noise that he expresses by banging on the wall with what sounds like a shoe. The stairs of the building smell of their own history, wood and damp and the ghost of 100 meals. The landlady's cat sits on the second-floor landing as always, watching you pass with the particular feline contempt of an animal who has observed many people's morning routines and found them wanting. On the street, autumn Paris hits you. The Butte Montmartre in October, just before the light comes up properly, is one of the most beautiful things you've ever seen, which you can acknowledge even when you're cold and late and your neck hurts. The mist sits low over the rooftops. The gaslights are still burning, putting their amber circles on the wet stones. A vegetable seller is making her way up the Rue de Bac with her cart, the wheels on the uneven cobbles making a sound like a slow drum roll. The smell is wood smoke and wet stone, and the distant yeast smell of a boulangerie already working. You walk quickly, hands in your pockets, shoulders up against the cold. You take the route you always take, down the Rue de Bac, past the windmills at the top of the hill, down the long slope toward the boulevard de Clichy, then along toward the opera and the right bank and the city that pays you. Montmartre is not quite Paris yet, which is part of why you chose it. It was only incorporated into the city in 1860, and it still has the feeling of a village that has been swallowed by something larger, but hasn't yet decided how to feel about it. Artists live here because the rents are cheap. Writers live here because the artists make it interesting. Cabarets have sprung up in the last decade. The Chat Noir moved here in 1881 and changed the neighbourhood's character in ways that are still working themselves out. You pass a poster for the Moulin Rouge on a wall at the corner of the Rue des Abbesses. Red letters, a dancer's silhouette. The Moulin Rouge has only been open for a year, since October of last year, and it has already become the kind of establishment that proper people attend while explaining to each other that they are attending it ironically. You have not been. It is not that kind of place. You have been to other kinds of places, but that is a different part of the story, and you are thinking about it now as you walk in the cold, which is dangerous, because the walk from Montmartre to the Rue Saint-Joseph takes about 40 minutes, and you do not need to be distracted. You need to be focused. You need to be thinking about what correspondence to draw for Fléchard, and whether the article on the new exposition of photography at the Galerie Georges Petit needs another paragraph, and whether you remembered to include the correct address on the letter to the printer. You do not need to be thinking about Saturday. But Saturday is what you're thinking about. There is a dinner. A private dinner in an apartment on the Rue de Bac, hosted by a man named Armand Leclerc, who writes poetry that is published in small quantities by a press that operates out of someone's living room on the Ile Saint-Louis. Leclerc has something, talent or something adjacent to it, and the right connections. He knows everyone in Paris who matters for a certain kind of person in a certain kind of world. You were invited last month through a chain of introductions that started with a composer named Gabriel, who you met at an exhibition opening, who took you for a coffee, who asked you a question that seemed innocuous, and then looked at you with a particular attention while you answered it. Who, when you finished answering, had a conversation with you that on the surface was about art and literature and the new movements, and who in the current Paris scene was worth knowing, and underneath the surface was something else entirely, something that recognized itself. And 2 weeks later a card appeared under your door on the Rue Lepic, small, cream-coloured, handwritten in a careful script, an address, a date, a time, the words, Armand Leclerc has the pleasure of inviting you to dinner, and in the corner, very small, the figure of a pink triangle, a carnation. You read it 6 times. You put it inside the cover of a book on your shelf behind other books where no one would find it. You took it out and read it again. You're going on Saturday. You walk faster. The cold helps. The cold is clean and uncomplicated and requires nothing of you except to keep moving. The Rue Saint-Joseph is a narrow street in the 2nd arrondissement, one of those Paris streets that exists in a state of permanent mid-morning, business-like and unpretty. The offices of Le Journal Illustré occupy the ground floor and first floor of a building that has seen better centuries. The stone is dark, the windows are tall, and inside everything smells of ink and paper and the particular mustiness of a place where words are processed in bulk. You arrive at 7:22. You know because there is a clock in the entry, and you check it every morning with the efficiency of someone who has been reprimanded once for being late and never intends to be reprimanded again. The office is already half awake. The typesetters arrived before 6. The boy who runs errands, a round-faced child named Theodore, who's about 15 and seems to be everywhere simultaneously, is working his way through the outer office with a broom. You hang your coat and hat, go to your desk and begin. The correspondence is mostly routine. A letter to a printer regarding delayed plates, an inquiry from a reader who wishes to correct a factual error in a piece published 3 issues ago about the Commune, a note to a photographer whose work is under consideration. You draft these with the automatic competence that has become your primary professional skill, the ability to produce clear and correct French in a formal register without having to think much about it, which leaves your mind free to think about other things. Your mind thinks about the dinner on Saturday. You know what these dinners are, or you know enough to know what you're being invited to. Gabriel explained it to you obliquely, the way everything in this world is explained obliquely, because directness is a luxury that certain kinds of people cannot afford. A gathering of literary men, people interested in poetry and painting and the newer thinking about the nature of the self. People who find in art a space to be more honest than the world outside allows. He said it without saying it, and you heard it without hearing it, and both of you had an entire conversation that contained all the real information in its spaces rather than its words. This is how you live, has been how you have lived since you understood, at some point in your adolescence in Bordeaux that you cannot precisely name, that you were different from what was expected. Not dramatically different. Not in a way that showed on your face or in the way you walked. Bordeaux, your law professor, would have been startled if anyone had suggested it. Your father would have been disbelieving. Your mother would have wept. You are different in the interior, in the private part of yourself that you carry around inside the correct clothes and the correct manner and the correctly expressed opinions about literature and art and the Republic. You are different in the part of yourself that looks at certain things and feels a pull that you have spent years pretending is something else or nothing at all. Paris is the first place you have lived where you have even begun to understand that there are others, where the difference is not singular, where there is, somewhere behind the painted surface of the city, a world. But here is the thing about that world. You are about to discover it. You're about to walk through a door you cannot unwalk through. And the city that has made this world possible, the city that decriminalized this life before your grandfather was born, thanks to the Napoleonic Code of 1791 that swept away the old laws and said that what consenting adults do in private is not the business of the state. That same city will still destroy you for it if you're not careful. France made it legal. France did not make it safe. There is no law against what you are. There are 1,000 social mechanisms for making sure you pay for it anyway. Employment, reputation, family. The particular violence of the society that has decided something is shameful, even when it cannot legally punish it. You know this. You've always known this. You carry it the way you carry your keys in your pocket, constantly aware of its weight, not thinking about it consciously, but always knowing it is there. You finish the correspondence. You lay it on Fléchard's desk. You return to your own desk and begin the morning's other work, reading galleys, checking facts, the careful editorial labour that is invisible when done correctly and catastrophic when not. Fléchard arrives at 7:31. He is a compact man in his 50s with a grey moustache and the expression of someone who suspects that most things are about to go wrong. He picks up the correspondence, reads through it, makes one small correction with a red pencil and says, "Good." He says this every morning. It is the entirety of the praise you've received in 14 months. It is enough. You have learned what enough means. The morning passes in the way office mornings pass, in small tasks and smaller interruptions and the peculiar time distortion of work that is moderately interesting but not interesting enough to make time move at a proper pace. The other editorial assistant, a man named Bernard who's been here for 8 years and has the permanently slightly dazed expression of a man who walked into a temporary position and never found the exit, sits at the desk opposite yours and annotates things. You exchange perhaps 30 words a day with Bernard. This is comfortable for both of you. At noon you eat lunch, which is bread and a piece of sausage and an apple that you have brought from the market near your building, eaten sitting at your desk because the cafe across the street is 15 centimes more than you want to spend on a Tuesday. You eat quickly and then take 20 minutes to walk to the nearby garden and breathe outdoor air and think. You think about Verlaine. Paul Verlaine is currently alive, which sometimes astonishes you. He is living badly, the way he has lived most of his adult life, cycling through periods of sobriety and collapse, writing poems that are genuinely extraordinary between bouts of poverty and illness, and the specific exhaustion of a man who has made certain choices and cannot now unmake them. He and Arthur Rimbaud had their great affair 15 years ago, and it ended with a gunshot and a scandal that shook the literary world and sent Verlaine to prison for 2 years. Everyone knows the story. Everyone has opinions about it. The safe opinion is that Verlaine was wrong, and Rimbaud was troubled, and the whole affair was a catastrophe of literary bohemianism. You have a different opinion. You have not shared it with anyone. You have read Verlaine's poems with a recognition that goes somewhere deeper than aesthetic appreciation. The poems in which desire is in every syllable, in which the longing for a particular kind of beauty is barely disguised, and sometimes not disguised at all. You read them and you feel for a few minutes less alone. Rimbaud has gone to Africa. He is in Abyssinia, trading coffee and guns, having abandoned poetry entirely at the age of 19, having written things that people are only now beginning to understand. He is 36 now. You wonder sometimes what he thinks about. You wonder if he thinks about the poems. You return to the office. The afternoon is more of the same. You write a brief piece about a new exhibition, 300 words, careful and correct. You check a set of figures. You organize a filing system that has been disorganized for so long that organizing it is almost archaeological. At 6 o'clock you put on your coat and hat and leave. The evening is different from the morning. Paris in the evening is a different city from Paris at 7 in the morning. Darker and louder and more itself. The gaslights burning gold against a sky that has gone from grey to violet to black. The cafés opening their bright interiors onto the streets. The vendors and the students and the working people and the fashionable people, all beginning the complicated process of the Parisian evening, which involves standing in places, sitting in places, moving between places, being seen. You take a slightly different route home on evenings when the weather is decent. Along the Rue de Rivoli, past the gardens, north along the boulevard, up through the lower reaches of Montmartre. This takes longer. You prefer it. Paris in the evening deserves to be walked through slowly, not because it is always beautiful, though it often is, but because it is always interesting, because the concentration of human beings doing human things is here, at its most dense and most visible and most strange. Tonight you stop at a café on the Rue des Martyrs and order a coffee and a glass of water. The coffee costs you 3 sous, which you tell yourself is a necessary expense because you need to sit and think, and the thinking is better done here than in your cold room. This is true. It is also true that you have been feeling, since you woke up this morning, the specific low-level anxiety of a person who is about to do something they have wanted to do for a long time and are therefore terrified of. The cafe is busy, a mix of people, workers in their dark jackets, artists with the paint-stained sleeves that have become almost a uniform in this neighbourhood, a few women who are not what they appear to be, which in Montmartre could mean almost anything. A man at the next table is reading a newspaper with the absorbed concentration of someone who is actually reading an entirely different document hidden inside the newspaper. You know this because you have done it yourself with letters you have needed to read in public while not appearing to be reading them. You think about the card, the small cream-coloured card currently inside the cover of a copy of Baudelaire's Les Fleurs du Mal, itself tucked behind a collection of Zola on your shelf, chosen because if anyone ever opened your room and looked at your books, which they wouldn't, they would see Zola first and assume the Baudelaire was there for literary reasons, which it is, just not only for those reasons. The pink triangle in the corner, so small. A symbol so subtle that most people who saw it would not know what it meant, or would assume it was a decorative flourish. But you knew what it meant. Gabriel had explained that too, in the oblique way of his explanations. The pink triangle, the carnation in the buttonhole, the codes by which one world makes itself known to itself inside another. You finish your coffee, you walk home. Madame Rochard is in the entrance hall when you come in, a small sharp woman in her 60s who runs her building with the ruthless efficiency of someone who has discovered that the world does not operate fairly and has decided to compensate by operating the thing she controls very fairly indeed, by her own lights. She looks at you. You have passed her inspection consistently for 14 months, and she has developed a tolerance for you that functions almost like warmth. Dinner in an hour, she says, pot au feu. You board with her, which includes an evening meal on weekdays, which is one of the reasons you chose her building, because the pot au feu is good and substantial and costs you less than the café. You go to your room, wash your hands and face with water from the pitcher, change your collar, read for 40 minutes in the fading light from the window, and then go down to dinner. The dining table seats 5. Tonight it is you and the Belgian artist Dupont, who emerges from his room occasionally like a pale marine creature surfacing briefly, and a music teacher named Mademoiselle Arnaud, who has lodged here for 3 years, and has the serene self-containment of a woman who has settled all her important questions, and a young man named Gustave who arrived last month from Clermont-Ferrand, and is learning the printing trade and looks permanently amazed by Paris, which is charming. The pot au feu is beef and root vegetables in a deep broth, with bread to soak it up. The conversation moves through the safe territory of Parisian table talk, the weather, which has turned colder than expected, the exposition of the previous year still being discussed, the new Moulin Rouge, which Dupont has attended and calls theatrical in a way that suggests he found it more interesting than theatrical, a piece in the newspaper about the Dreyfus affair beginning to develop, which will accelerate into something terrible over the next few years, though none of you know that yet. You eat and speak when spoken to and listen more than you contribute, which is how you prefer it. You have learned that listening at tables like this is more valuable than speaking, because people reveal themselves when they feel they are not being particularly observed, and what they reveal is sometimes useful and sometimes simply interesting. Dupont, for instance, has been watching you for 2 weeks, with a particular attention that you have filed away without acting on. He's not subtle about it. He is Belgian. You have not decided what to do about this and may not need to decide because Dupont seems content to simply watch, which may be sufficient for whatever purpose he has in mind. After dinner you excuse yourself and go back to your room. You light the lamp. The room is warmer now, relatively, warmed by the building around it and the lamp and your own body. You sit in the one chair and open the Baudelaire and take out the card and read it for probably the 12th time. Armand Leclerc, Rue de Bac, Saturday evening, 8 o'clock. An expression of pleasure at your expected presence in the formal language of invitations. And in the corner, the small pink triangle. You put it back and close the book and stare at the ceiling for a while. Here is the thing about Paris in 1890 that you have to understand. It is not what people in your position imagine before they arrive. In Bordeaux, in the bourgeois dining rooms and the provincial literariness of a city that is perfectly pleasant but not quite Paris, you had constructed a version of Paris that was, in your imagination, a place of freedom, where what you are is simply another thing to be, where the coded world you've been sensing the edges of is available and welcoming and safe. Paris is freer than Bordeaux. This is true. The city is enormous and anonymous, and there are spaces within it where things happen that would be unthinkable in smaller places. The cafe culture allows men to sit together for hours without explanation. The artistic world is capacious enough to contain considerable strangeness. There are certain establishments in certain parts of the city, certain streets in the 9th arrondissement, certain dance halls on the left bank, where people like you move openly enough if you know to look. But free is relative, and safety is never absolute. What you have learned in 14 months is that the freedom of Paris is the freedom of being unseen, not the freedom of being seen and accepted. The city does not care what you are as long as you are invisible about it. The moment you become visible, the city will crush you with the same indifferent efficiency it crushes everything it wants to crush. There have been scandals. There are always scandals. Men in good positions, with good families and good reputations, suddenly ruined by a letter opened by the wrong person, or a witness to something in the wrong place, or a blackmailer who decided to exercise his leverage. The newspapers cover these with the elaborate pretense of moral outrage that allows them to describe things in detail while claiming to condemn them. The public reads them with the elaborate pretense of shock that allows them to enjoy the details while claiming to be disgusted. You know one man, a lawyer named Etienne, whom you met at a gallery opening, who spent 3 years being blackmailed by a former lover and paid out the equivalent of most of his savings before the man grew bored or died or moved on. Etienne told you this not directly, not explicitly, but in the way that everything in this world is communicated, in fragments and inference, and the careful arrangement of facts that add up to something neither of you names. This is the world you're entering on Saturday. The invitation from Leclerc represents something. The salons of this kind have existed in Paris for decades. Private gatherings that operate under the public description of literary evenings and artistic discussions, which they are partially, but which are also something else. Spaces where men can simply be themselves for the duration of an evening, where conversation does not require the management and filtration that daily life requires, where you do not have to perform. This costs something. The performance of not performing, the decision to trust a room, the exposure of being known. But you have been in Paris for 14 months, and you've been alone for all of them, in the particular way that someone who cannot be themselves with anyone is always alone, even in a city of 2 million. And you're 23 years old, and you're tired of carrying this thing around the city every day, inside the correct clothes and the correct manner, and saying nothing about it to anyone, except Gabriel, obliquely, except now Leclerc's card in the back of the Baudelaire. You blow out the lamp. You lie in the dark and listen to the city which never properly stops. The sound of the Rue de Bac settling into its night version. Distant music from a cafe somewhere, the rhythm of it carrying without the tune. A cat doing something dramatic in the courtyard below. The Belgian's footstep overhead, the creak of his particular floorboard. Saturday is 2 days away. You close your eyes. The city hums around you, 300 feet below the top of the But, at the centre of the largest empire on Earth's most luminous capital, in a room that smells of coal smoke and old wallpaper, inside a life that is correct and composed and carefully maintained on the outside, and something else entirely within, something that, 2 days from now, you're going to let be itself in a room full of strangers. The thought is terrifying. The thought is the most exciting thing you have felt in months. You sleep. Thursday passes. Friday passes. The office, the correspondence, the galleys, the walking, the cafe, the dinner, the routine that has become your life, the routine that holds you in place while the real questions move underneath it. You write a letter to your father, cheerful and vague, mentioning a reception at a publisher's house that was not unpleasant, which is almost true because there was a reception, though you were not exactly a guest. More a person who arrived with someone who was invited and stood at the edge of things for an hour. You do not mention the dinner on Saturday, obviously. Friday night you go to bed at 10 and lie awake until at least midnight thinking about what to wear. This is both trivial and not. In the world you're about to enter, presentation carries a particular weight. The way Oscar Wilde dresses when he is in Paris, the green carnation, the fur-lined coat, the languid performance of his public self, is a form of argument as much as a personal style. It is saying, I am not hiding. Within the private salons, the signals are more subtle. A flower in the lapel, a particular shade. Details that mean nothing to the uninitiated and everything to those who know. You have a green carnation. You bought it on an impulse 3 months ago from a florist on the Boulevard Saint-Germain, not because you planned to wear it anywhere specific, but because you felt, looking at it in the florist's bucket, that having it mattered. That possessing it was a kind of private declaration. It has been sitting in a glass on your windowsill long since dried, losing its green and becoming something pale and papery. You take it down and hold it in the dark. Saturday. Saturday morning you wake early, before the bells, and the first thing you feel is an acute and physical anxiety, a tightening in the chest that is not quite fear but is fear's close relative. You get up, wash, dress in your regular clothes for the daytime because the evening requires a different set of preparations. You go out. Montmartre on a Saturday morning is slower, louder, and more chaotic than on weekdays, and this is saying something because weekday Montmartre is not exactly quiet. The market on the Rue de Bac is in full display. Vegetables from the market gardens on the outskirts of the city, gleaming in the pale October light. The cheese seller's stall emits a smell that you've come to think of as the smell of France being fundamentally French. A woman is arguing with a vegetable seller about the weight of cabbages with an intensity that suggests this is a philosophical dispute as much as a commercial one. You buy an apple and eat it walking, which your mother would have considered low. You go to the Louvre. This is what you do on Saturday morning sometimes when you need to think, or when you need to not think. The Louvre is free on certain days, or nearly free, and it is large enough that you can walk through it for an hour and see things of such concentrated beauty that the rest of your concerns become briefly very small. You like the Dutch masters, which perhaps says something about your character, the careful attention to the ordinary, the light on domestic surfaces, the way great technical skill is applied to everyday objects and makes them suddenly seem to contain everything. You stand for a while in front of a Vermeer, the quiet of a woman reading a letter, the window's light falling across her, the way the painting holds that specific moment of privacy, the moment when one person is alone with words meant only for them. What is she reading? What does it say? What does she feel that she cannot show? You have been Vermeer's woman, in a sense. You have stood with letters and felt things you couldn't show. You walk through the galleries for an hour and a half and feel better. You go to a brasserie on the Rue de Rivoli and spend money you can justify as a Saturday necessity on lunch that is decent. A carafe of wine and a plate of charcuterie and bread, eaten slowly, watching the street through the window. Paris on a Saturday afternoon. The weekend version of the city, which has a different quality from the weekday version, looser, more self-conscious about its leisure. You go home, you wash, you dress. The evening suit is the one you had made in Bordeaux before you left, by a tailor who understood that you needed something that would last and that would be correct in Paris, even if you did not yet know in what context you would need it. Dark wool, good cut, slightly austere, which is fine. Austerity in a gathering of aesthetes is itself a kind of statement. The white shirt, the cuffs, the cravat, which tonight you tie differently, with the small, careful knot that you've been practicing for no reason you admitted to yourself until now. You look in the mirror. You look like a young man going to a dinner. This is correct. This is the point. You take the carnation from the windowsill and put it in your buttonhole, where its desiccated little form looks slightly forlorn but is recognizable for what it is. Then you look at yourself again in the mirror and feel, very briefly, that you are going to be sick. You're not going to be sick. You're going to walk down the Rue de Bac and across the city to the Rue de Bac, and you're going to ring a doorbell, and someone is going to open a door, and you are going to go inside. You have been alone for 14 months. You leave the house at 7:15 to give yourself time to walk and to arrive not first. The evening is cold and clear, the first properly cold evening of autumn, the kind that arrives without warning and reminds you that winter is an eventually rather than a hypothetically. The gaslights on the boulevard are very bright against it. The city has a sharpened quality in cold air, the edges more distinct, the smells more separate from each other. Stone, wine, roasting chestnuts from a cart on the corner, horse, the chemical ghost of the paint on new buildings. You walk south, down from Montmartre, past the opera that Garnier built, completed now for 15 years and still the most opulent building you have ever stood in front of, its gold and marble and statuary, the massive facade topped by the Pegasus and the Apollo and the rearing figures of poetry and drama. A building that says without any modesty whatsoever that Paris considers the arts to be matters of the highest national importance. Past the grand boulevards with their theatres and their cafés and their rushing people. Over the river, where the Seine at night holds the reflections of the gas lamps in long wavering columns of gold. The 7th arrondissement is quieter than where you live, wealthier. The streets have the composed quality of money that does not need to perform. The buildings are elegant and correct, their facades pale stone, their windows with their carefully arranged curtains. The Rue de Bac is a long street running perpendicular to the river. You know it slightly. You've walked it before on Sundays as a form of seeing how the other half of Paris arranges itself. Number 47. A building with a carriage door of dark wood and iron fittings, and, beside it, a smaller door with a brass bell pull. You stand on the pavement for a moment. The cold air moves through the cravat. You ring. There is a pause, then footsteps on stone. Then the door opens. The man who opens it is perhaps 30, with dark hair and an expression of composed welcome. He is dressed in evening clothes of a quality considerably better than yours, with a carnation in his buttonhole that is fresh and very green, and he looks at your buttonhole as he opens the door, and something in his expression shifts very slightly, a recognition, and he says, "Monsieur Pelletier, I'm so glad you came. My name is Armand." You step inside. The entrance hall smells of beeswax candles and lily of the valley, someone's perfume, and beneath that the dry warmth of a well-heated building. There are paintings on the walls, large and dark and excellent. Not the kind bought for decoration, but the kind collected by someone who knows what they are looking at. A bronze figure on a console table. A carpet that your feet disappear into. Armand Leclerc is perhaps 30 as you thought, with the kind of face that Paris produces occasionally, all intelligence and careful amusement. A face that has clearly spent considerable time deciding what to reveal and what to keep back. He takes your coat and hands it to someone, a servant who appears and disappears with practised invisibility. "Come in," he says. "You're not the first, but not the last. There are people here you'll want to meet." He opens a door, and you step through it into the world. The room is large. lit by a chandelier and by candelabras on the mantelpiece and on the sideboards. It is warm, heated by a large white tiled fireplace that is doing its work thoroughly. There are perhaps 20 people present, some standing in clusters, some sitting on the various chairs and chaises longues that have been arranged with a casual deliberateness that suggests they were thought about and then rearranged until they looked unconsidered. A servant moves through the room with a tray of glasses. The people, they are most of them men. There are 3 women, who you will come to understand are a specific kind of woman who has her own reasons for being in spaces like this, her own private freedoms that she protects with the same care you protect yours. But the room is mostly men in their 20s and 30s, and 1 or 2 who might be 50, in their evening clothes, talking, just talking. You've been to professional gatherings, to gallery openings, to literary receptions. You know what those feel like. The calibrated performance, the careful management of impression, the constant awareness of your audience, the way every word is spoken with one eye on how it is landing. This room is different. You cannot immediately locate the difference, but you can feel it. Something in the quality of the attention, the way men listen to each other in this room, the way laughter happens, not the social laughter of public occasions, but something more immediate and more specific, the way the air in the room feels, as if it has been depressurized by several degrees from the normal pressure of a Parisian social gathering. You stand near the door for a moment, just receiving it. Then Gabriel appears. Gabriel, whose full name is Gabriel Fontaine, who is a composer of music that has been described as interesting by critics who mean something more than interesting, is 27 years old and has the kind of sharp, mobile face that registers everything it sees immediately. He spots you from across the room and crosses to you with the fluid ease of a person who has been doing this for years. You came, he says. I came, you say. He hands you a glass of wine. The wine is good, considerably better than what you're used to. He stands beside you and begins very quietly to tell you who is in the room. The tall man by the window is a painter named Edouard Bazille, who has exhibited at the Salons des Indépendants, and who is known for large canvases of male bathers that are beautiful and technically serious, and which prompt, in the press, a particular quality of nervous praise. The man talking to Bazille is a writer named Valentin Marais, who publishes in the Mercure de France under a name that is not quite his own. The woman in the dark green dress is Mathilde Cordier, who writes poetry under the name Cordier, and has published 2 collections that have been received as interesting curiosities. Beside her is another woman, her companion, whose name you don't catch. The older man on the settee near the fire is someone you recognize. You recognize him because his photograph has been in the newspapers, because his name is one of those names that is currently in the literary air, pressed into the context of this particular room, suddenly very loud. Paul Verlaine. He is 56 years old, and he looks all of them and more. The face that peers out of the newspaper photographs sharp and mobile in youth has become complicated, pitted from illness, heavy. His eyes are dark, and they move around the room with the particular attention of someone who is accustomed to being looked at and has developed a relationship with being observed that includes both weariness and appetite. He is holding a glass of wine, not his first of the evening. He is listening to a young man who is speaking to him with the earnest intensity of someone speaking to a monument. You stare. Gabriel notices. He's here every few weeks, Gabriel says quietly. Armand's been a patron of sorts. He is. Gabriel makes a small gesture that encompasses the greatness and the ruin, and everything between. He is himself. You know the history. Everyone does, in this world if not in the wider one. Verlaine and Rimbaud. The 10 years of work before it, the extraordinary poems, the relationship that the newspapers call dissolute and depraved, the relationship that produced some of the most extraordinary love poetry of the century, the quarrel in Brussels in 1873, the gunshot, Verlaine's arrest and imprisonment for 2 years, Rimbaud walking away from poetry entirely at 19 and going to Africa. Verlaine continued, converted to Catholicism in prison, and wrote poems about God that are as full of desire as the poems about Rimbaud, which is either irony or coherence depending on your understanding of the matter. Continued to publish, continued to be brilliant, continued to deteriorate in health and circumstance. He's here tonight in a drawing room on the Rue de Bac, and you are 23 years old and you are staring. Go and talk to him, Gabriel says. I wouldn't know what to say. Gabriel gives you a look that says, the fact that you think you need something to say is the problem. He gives you a small push that is not quite a push, more a suggestion expressed physically. You cross the room. You're going to remember this for the rest of your life. The particular quality of those 10 feet between where you stood and where the settee is, the way the carpet felt under your feet, the sound of the room around you, the smell of beeswax and wine, the way Verlaine looked up as you approached. Monsieur Verlaine, you say. Your voice comes out level, which surprises you. Forgive me. I am Edouard Pelletier. I work at Le Journal Illustré. I've been reading your work since I was... He cuts you off with a gesture that is not unkind. Sit down, he says. His voice is deeper than you expected. You don't have to tell me what journal you work at. Sit down. Have you got wine? You sit. You have wine. Which one? He asks. I'm sorry? Which poem? The one that made you... He gestures. Again that comprehensive gesture. Romances sans paroles, you say. The ariettes. The one that begins, Il pleure dans mon cœur. He looks at you for a moment with an expression you cannot quite read. Everyone likes that one, he says. What else? You name 2 others, one of the later ones. He listens, his expression shifts. You've actually read them, he says. Most people who come up to me have read about me. There is a difference, you agree? He takes a drink of his wine. What do you want? He asks. Not rudely. It is a genuine question. You think about it seriously, which he seems to appreciate because he waits. To understand how to write the true thing, you say. The thing that is actually true, not the performed version. He looks at you for a long time. He says, that is not a comfortable ambition. No, you say. I know. He nods. And then, to your surprise, he begins to talk. Not the monument talk, not the talk of a literary man performing his reputation. He talks the way a person talks when they're tired of performing. He talks about Rimbaud. He talks about Rimbaud without saying Rimbaud's name. He talks about a certain period of his life and a certain quality of feeling, and what it cost and what it gave, and what happens to a person who has felt a thing that intensely and then has to continue living afterward. You listen. The room moves around you both, the other conversations, the servant with the wine, the laughter from the other side of the room. But for perhaps 20 minutes you're in a pocket of stillness with Paul Verlaine, and he is talking to you about what it means to want to say the true thing, and the price of saying it, and whether the price is worth it. He does not answer the last question. He finishes his wine and looks around the room with an expression that might be affection. These evenings, he says, gesturing, they are not nothing, you know. People think... He pauses. People think this kind of thing is decadence, indulgence. They miss the point. The point is that in here, a man can think. In here, the thinking doesn't cost you something every time you do it. He looks at you. You understand that, he says. Yes, you say. He nods. Good. Then you'll survive Paris. He takes his glass and turns back to the young man who is still hovering at the edge of your conversation, clearly wanting to return to the monument mode, and you understand that you've been dismissed, and you stand and move away. You find yourself at the window. Outside, the Rue de Bac is quiet. The gas lights. A carriage passing slowly. The city's nighttime version of itself. Your hands are shaking slightly. You notice this with a kind of interested detachment, as if you are watching yourself from a small distance. You've been in Paris for 14 months. You've been alone for 14 months. And now you're in a room where people are just talking, just being. The specific gravity of that, the weight of its difference from everything else, is settling into your chest like something warm. Gabriel materializes at your elbow. Well, he says, you tell him what Verlaine said. The words about thinking, about it costing something every time. Gabriel listens. He nods. That's him, he says. When he's being himself, that's him. Armand appears then, threading through the room with the ease of a host who is entirely at home in his own space, which is a quality that seems obvious but is in fact quite rare. He is holding a small glass of something amber-coloured, and he looks at you with an expression of genuine interest, the expression of someone who is actually curious rather than performing curiosity, which is also rarer than it should be. You found Verlaine, he says. He found me, you say. Armand smiles. That's the right way to describe it, he says. He tends to. He leans against the window frame and looks out at the Rue de Bac for a moment. You're new to Paris, he says. 14 months, you say. But new to this, he says. This meaning, the room, the dinner, this world. Yes, you say. He nods. He's quiet for a moment in the way of a person who's deciding how much to say and has settled on a quantity. You should know, he says finally, what we are and what we aren't. You wait. We are people who need a space to breathe in, he says. That's all this is, at its simplest. We're not a movement. We're not organised. We are people who have decided, for the duration of these evenings, to set down the performance. He looks at you. The performance costs a great deal, he says. Most people don't calculate it properly. They think they're fine. They think they've managed it. And then one day they realise they haven't been breathing properly for years. You look down at your glass. Paris is freer than where you came from, Armand says. You're right to think so. But freedom in Paris means something specific. It means anonymity. It means the city has so many people that there are always spaces between them. It doesn't mean protection. Anyone who tells you it means protection is selling you something. He says this without alarm, as information rather than warning. But, he says, and here his expression changes very slightly, and becomes something less composed and more actual. But this, he says, touching his carnation, this is also real. This is also Paris. The two things are both true. He moves away to welcome a new arrival. You watch him go. The dinner is served at 9. A long table set with white linen and good silver. Candles in branched holders. The whole arrangement formal enough to signal that this is a serious occasion, and informal enough to signal that the seriousness is of a particular kind. The kind that allows for real conversation rather than the performance of conversation. You are seated between Gabriel and a man named Henri Delamare, who writes theatre criticism for a newspaper slightly more literary than the one you work for, and who has, you discover over the first course, a knowledge of contemporary theatre that is encyclopedic, and an opinion of almost all of it that is detailed and absolute. The first course is a bisque of some kind, excellent, rich with cream and shellfish, served in white bowls with a rim of gilt. Around the table the conversations have settled into their natural shapes, the way conversations at good dinners do, 2 or 3 conversations happening simultaneously, overlapping at intervals. Verlaine is at the far end of the table, still talking. He talks the way a man talks who has spent decades being interesting at tables, and who does this now on a kind of automatic system, the words flowing because they always have. The young man who was speaking with him is now listening with the expression of someone who cannot quite believe where they are. You know that expression. You have it on your face too, probably, though you're trying to wear it more quietly. The conversation around you moves through contemporary literature. There is debate about whether Zola's naturalism has become a kind of machine, admirable in its precision but finally mechanical in the way a machine is mechanical. About Mallarmé, whose poetry has become so concentrated, so stripped of all referential meaning, that it exists almost as pure sound. About an exhibition that is opening next week at the Galerie des Artistes Modernes, about a production of something at the Odeon that is apparently extraordinary, about a poet who was recently in a situation, the word situation carrying all its freight in this context, that had resolved itself better than expected, though there had been a period of serious concern. The anxiety that this last thread of conversation produces runs through the table like electricity through water, invisible but felt. Everyone knows what a situation means. Everyone has their own proximity to having been in one. The conversation moves past it quickly, not out of avoidance, but out of the shared understanding that this is not the time or place to linger on it. This is supposed to be the time off. Gabriel leans toward you at one point, under cover of reaching for the bread, and says very quietly, "You're doing fine. You hadn't realized you were performing being fine, but you appreciate it. The main course is roasted duck with something complex happening with orange and chestnuts. The wine changes to a burgundy that is genuinely excellent, which tells you something about Armand's resources or his priorities or both. Henri Delamare, the theatre critic, turns out to be one of those people who function in a social context as a kind of engine, someone whose own conversational energy is so consistent that it generates energy in the people around him. He talks, he asks questions, he actually listens to the answers and asks further questions based on what he heard, rather than what he expected to hear, which is rarer than it should be. By the third course you have told him more about your life in Bordeaux, your arrival in Paris, your work at Le Journal Illustré, than you've told most people in 14 months, not the interior parts, but the exterior shape. He listens. He says, "You should be writing more than correspondence. I write occasional pieces, you say. Minor things. What kind of thing? Exhibition reviews, occasional cultural notices." He considers this. "What do you want to write?" the question Verlaine asked, slightly differently phrased, but the same question underneath. "I want to write about." You pause. You're looking at the candle in front of you, the way the flame moves slightly in the imperceptible air currents of the room. You want to write about what it is actually like, you say, to be a person in a city, not the surface of it, the interior. He looks at you steadily. "That's a difficult brief," he says. "I know." "The newspapers don't publish the interior," he says. "Not really. That's what the literary press is for, or was, before the literary press decided that difficulty was the same as depth. He seems genuinely interested in this. He names 2 or 3 publications that might be more receptive to that kind of work. He names 2 or 3 writers whose work does that thing you're describing in different ways. He talks with the enthusiasm of a man who genuinely loves literature and has opinions about it, and finds it rare to talk about this with someone who is not performing having opinions. Dessert, coffee, the formality of the table beginning to dissolve as the evening deepens. After dinner, the gathering drifts back toward the drawing room. More wine. Someone sits at the piano in the corner and plays something quiet and deliberate that you recognize as Fauré. Pavane, probably, and the music gives the room a different quality. The conversation becoming lower, the evening entering its later phase. You find yourself near the fire, standing with a glass of wine, talking to a man you've not been introduced to. He is perhaps 35, with the kind of face that has been handsome and knows it without being vain about it, and he sits in a chair rather than stands, with his legs crossed and his glass held loosely, with the ease of a man who does not carry himself carefully because he has long since stopped needing to. He asks, "First time at one of Armand's evenings?" "Yes." He nods. "I remember my first one. It was," he thinks, "it was like discovering a room in a house you've lived in for years, a room you didn't know existed, and inside the room, everything that was in the rest of the house but arranged differently. You think about this." "That's exactly right," you say. He smiles. He reaches into his pocket and produces a card. His name is written on it, and below his name, an address in the 8th arrondissement, and below that, in small print, Homme de lettres. "Come to my salon sometime," he says. "Thursday evenings, a smaller group, more focused. Armand's evenings are good, but they cast a wide net. Mine is," he considers the word, "more specific." He says it with an inflection that carries all its meaning in a space below the words, and you receive it in the same way, the communication running parallel to the words that contain it, in the channel that runs underneath everything in this world. You take the card. The evening winds down gradually, the way good evenings wind down, not abruptly but in a series of stages, as if the party itself is reluctant to acknowledge its own ending. People begin to make departures, the formal expressions of pleasure that precede the actual departures, the retrieval of coats. Verlaine is still talking, now to Armand, the 2 of them leaning toward each other with the intimacy of long acquaintance. You find Gabriel near the door. He looks at you. "Well?" he says again. You look back at the room, at the people in it, at the paintings on the walls and the candles on the mantelpiece, and the Fauré still continuing softly, and Verlaine still talking, and Armand with his composed attention, and Henri Delamere in the corner making somebody laugh. "I didn't know it was real," you say. Gabriel's quiet for a moment. "Most people don't," he says, "until they see it." He helps you find your coat. Armand appears to say farewell, pressing your hand warmly and saying that he hopes to see you again, which is not the social formula, but the genuine version, or at least it sounds that way. You step out into the Rue de Bac. The cold hits you, and it is on this particular night a kind of relief. The cold is clean, uncomplicated. Your face is warm from the wine and the fire and the evening, and the cold air on it feels exact and clarifying. You stand on the pavement for a moment. The city is still going. Carriages, figures in the distance, a cat crossing the wet cobblestones with the self-possession of an animal who owns the night. You walked here from Montmartre with a dried carnation in your buttonhole and a terror in your chest that you are managing with the effort of managed things. You're walking back with the carnation still there, slightly more bedraggled, and the terror is gone. Something else is there instead. Something you don't have a precise word for yet. You will think of the word later. You think the word might be belonging. You walk back north along the Seine, not hurrying. The river at midnight is a different animal from the river at noon. At noon it is commercial. It is working. It is full of barges and the noise of the city's business. At midnight it is itself, the reflections of the gaslights in the black water, the sound of it moving against the stone embankments, the smell of cold water and stone and deep time. Paris has been a city for 2,000 years. The river has been here longer. The Gauls who were here before the Romans walked along this same river and thought things you will never know the content of. The Romans built their settlements here. The Franks, the Merovingians, the Capetians. Every generation of the city walking alongside this water and feeling perhaps what you are feeling. The strange comfort of water that moves and does not stop and does not particularly care about human troubles. You feel the evening settling into you as you walk. Verlaine's voice, the room, the card in your pocket, the sensation of being in a space where you did not have to calculate your breathing. Armand said it right. The performance costs a great deal. Most people don't calculate it properly. You have been calculating it for years, actually. The constant small expenditure of energy that it takes to exist in the world as the person other people expect rather than the person you are. It accumulates. The way interest accumulates on a debt you didn't quite realize you were accumulating. Until one evening you walk into a room on the Rue de Bac, and suddenly the debt stops accumulating for 3 hours, and you feel the difference in your body like the absence of a sound you had stopped noticing was there. You cross the river. The bridges of Paris at midnight are their own kind of beautiful. The lights on the water, the silence between the city's sounds. You stop in the middle and look downstream toward the Ile de la Cité, where Notre Dame sits on its island, enormous and dark. The gargoyles along its parapets leaning out over the river with the expressions of animals who've seen everything and are no longer surprised by any of it. Notre Dame has been here since 1163. It has seen 800 years of Paris, wars and plagues and revolutions and coronations, and the particular continuous strangeness of human life. Its gargoyles have watched the Seine go by under every possible condition, and they are still there, lean and sardonic, watching. You are here. Tonight you are here. You keep walking. Uphill, back into Montmartre. The But at midnight is quiet in its specific way, the way of a neighbourhood that has had a long night and is winding down. The cabarets are still going faintly, the sound of the Chat Noir carrying 2 streets away, a melody. The streets are not empty. Montmartre's streets are never empty, but they are less crowded, and the people in them are the people who belong to the night. The late walkers and the homecomers, and the people who are thinking about things and need to move while thinking. You let yourself into the building quietly, up the stairs, past the cat who's now on the first floor landing in a different position, but with the same expression. Your room. You hang your coat. You take off your boots. You sit in the chair and take the card from your pocket. The card the man by the fire gave you. Thursday evenings. A smaller group. More specific. You put it on the table next to the Baudelaire. You lie down on the iron bed with its thin mattress and its 2 blankets and your overcoat on top. The room is dark. The sounds of the city drift up through the window, softer now, the city's late breathing. You think about Verlaine's face when you name the poems, the way his expression changed. You've actually read them. You think about the room, the way it felt to be in a room that felt like a room. You think about the word you don't quite have yet, belonging. You close your eyes. Outside, the distant hammer on the Sacré-Cœur has stopped. The construction workers go home at night. But the stone is up there, accumulating. The white basilica growing slowly on the highest point of the hill, visible on clear days from half of Paris, its unfinished domes catching the light. It is being built to expiate the sins of the commune, which is what the official version says. It is being built to show that France is still Catholic, still orderly, still moral. The Republic ordered it in 1873, and construction began in 1875, and it will not be finished until 1914, 14 years from now in a world you cannot imagine, and when it is finished, the city will have divided opinions about it, the way it has divided opinions about everything, which is the particular civic vigour of Paris. You will have opinions about it too, but not tonight. Tonight, you are warm enough, fed. And having done the thing you were most afraid of doing, and having survived it, and having found on the other side of it something you did not expect, which is this, the specific relief of being known, however slightly, in a room where the knowledge cost you nothing to give. That is enough. For tonight, that is enough. You sleep. The weeks that follow have a different quality from the weeks before. This is the thing that happens when a door opens. The time before the door looks different in retrospect. You have not changed. The city has not changed. The work at the Journal Illustré has not changed. The correspondence, the galleys, Fléchard's small red corrections, the morning coffee, the afternoon's editorial labour. But something in how you carry the days is different. You go to Armand's next dinner, 3 weeks after the first. You go to the Thursday salon of the man by the fire, whose name turns out to be Philippe Girard, and who is, in the smaller and more specific gathering of his apartment in the 8th, exactly as he was described himself, more focused. The conversations here are denser, more personal. The things said in them closer to the interior life of the people who say them. There are 8 people at Philippe's table the first time you go, and by the end of the evening you've had the most honest conversations you've had since arriving in Paris. You're learning the language, not French. Your French is already fine. You mean the language within the language, the one that runs underneath Parisian French in certain context and conveys entire meanings in the spaces between words. A glance that means, I recognize what you are. A particular phrasing that asks, are you one of us? The ways of speaking that are both covering and revealing, that allow someone to say something true in a room where saying it directly might be dangerous. This is not a language invented in Paris. It is old. It exists everywhere these conversations need to happen in the world, which is everywhere, because people like you have always existed in every city and every period, and they have always needed ways to find each other. But Paris has refined it to something approaching an art form. Henri Delamare, who you see again at Philippe's Salon, explains it to you one Thursday over a glass of Bordeaux that makes you briefly homesick in a way you hadn't expected. The codes exist, he says, because they must. Not because we enjoy the theatre of it, though some people do. Because the alternative is silence, and silence is its own kind of death. So you learn the language. You learn what a green carnation means. You learn what it means when a man describes a friend as his dear friend with a particular quality of emphasis. You learn the magazines, the papers, the particular bookshops where certain sections exist for certain purposes. You learn which cafés you can enter and which ones you cannot. He drinks, and then, he says, you learn something harder. You learn who to trust with what. You learn the gradations. There are people who know, and people who know but cannot be told they know, and people who would not know what to do with knowing and would therefore be dangerous. Mapping this is the work of years. He sounds tired saying this, not bitter, just tired. The specific fatigue of someone who has been careful for a long time. You look at him. Does it stop being exhausting, you ask? He is quiet for a moment. Parts of it, he says, the obvious external parts, you stop being startled by your own existence. But he makes a small gesture toward the room, toward the larger world outside the room. The management, that doesn't stop. You get better at it. You get faster. It becomes more automatic, but it doesn't stop. A pause. This is why the evenings matter, he says. Armand's, Philippe's, these small spaces. Not because we're hiding, because we're resting. You think about Verlaine again, the room where a man can think, where the thinking doesn't cost you something every time you do it. You have started to understand the architecture of this life, the way it is organized in layers. The outermost layer, the work, the office, the landlady's dinner table, the letters to your father, the whole constructed surface of a life that is normal and correct and explicable. The middle layer, the city itself, the freedom of anonymity, the way Paris contains multitudes and does not particularly inquire into any of them, and the interior layer, these rooms, these evenings, these conversations, the slow building of a world within the world. The Louvre is a reference point you return to in your thinking. Those galleries of Dutch masters with their light on domestic surfaces. The way ordinary life becomes, in sufficient detail, something luminous. The people who lived in those paintings had their own interior layers, their own worlds within worlds, their own things they carried that the surface didn't show. The woman reading the letter, the merchant at his desk. Whatever they carried it alongside the ordinary, alongside the morning and the work and the evening. That's what life is. You are learning to carry yours. November comes to Paris with its cold and its grey light and its particular beauty, which is the beauty of a city that functions as an argument against weather, a city that insists on its own glamour even when the sky is the colour of old lead. The chestnut sellers set up at corners. The gaslights come on earlier each evening. The river runs grey-green and fast under the rain. You write your first real piece, not for the journal Illustré, for a small literary magazine that Henri Delamare mentioned, called Les Cahiers de Paris, which publishes the kind of work that the newspapers cannot publish, the interior kind. You write a piece about Montmartre, 3,000 words. It is about the neighbourhood, the artist quarter, the way it sits above the city and looks down at it. It is also about something else, something that moves through the piece in the way that the real things move through the coded conversations, present and invisible simultaneously if you know how to read it. You send it in without much expectation. 2 weeks later, a letter arrives at your office from the editor of Les Cahiers de Paris, a man whose name you know from the masthead and whose letters, you will come to discover, always read as if they were written in exactly the amount of time they needed, and not a moment more. The piece is good, the letter says. We would like to publish it. We would like to see more. You read the letter twice, then you put it in your desk drawer and get back to Fléchard's correspondence, and don't think about it for the rest of the morning, which takes considerable effort. At noon you walk to the garden, eat your bread and apple, and allow yourself to feel pleased. The pleasure is clean and particular, the pleasure of a thing you made being recognized as a thing, not for reasons of connection or accident or being in the right room at the right time, because you made it, and it was good enough. You have been in Paris for 15 months. This is what 15 months looks like. The winter deepens. December brings a specific quality of Parisian cold, the damp cold of a river city that gets into your joints and lives there until spring, that no amount of coat layering entirely defeats. The building's heat continues to be rationed by Madame Rochard on a schedule that relates to the calendar rather than the temperature. You develop the habit of wearing your overcoat inside your room for the first hour after waking as a transitional measure. The social world of these evenings continues. You become more comfortable in it. The initial terror of the dinner on the Rue de Bac, of stepping through the door, of being in a room where the pretense is suspended, that terror, having been survived once, reduces with each subsequent visit. Not eliminated. You're not sure it ever eliminates entirely. But it becomes a familiar kind of anxiety rather than an unfamiliar one, which is different. You learn more of the geography. There are more spaces than you initially understood. There are certain cafés on the left bank, around the Rue Jacob and the Rue de Seine, where men like you can sit in the afternoon and be among themselves without particular formality. There are establishments of a more specifically physical character, which are a different kind of space and involve different kinds of management. There are the salons, which are the most specifically intellectual and social, and there are smaller versions of salons, the dinners and gatherings that exist on every scale, from Armand's 20-person formal evenings to meetings of 3 friends in someone's apartment where the conversation is exactly what it is without any frame around it. You move through all of them. You're careful. You're always careful. The caution that Armand described, the knowledge of who can know what, the mapping of gradations of trust, you work at this with the attention it deserves. You are 23 years old and you do not always know where the lines are, but you are learning. There is, in January, a situation that touches your own circle close enough to be instructive. A young man named René, who you have met at Philippe Girard's salon, a painter of modest talent but considerable charm, is in a situation. The word situation again, with all its freight. The nature of it. A former lover from whom René separated a year ago has produced letters, not explicit letters. René had been too careful for explicit letters, but letters that are suggestive enough, in the right reading, to be used. The former lover wants money, a specific sum, large enough to be consequential. You hear this from Gabriel, who hears it from Philippe. The network by which information travels in this world is faster and more complete than the network in the office, possibly because the information is more necessary. The gathering at Philippe's salon in the week of this becoming known has a particular quality. The conversation goes on. The wine is poured. The discussion of Mallarmé and the question of whether symbolism has reached a point of productive crisis or terminal abstraction continues with its usual focused intensity. But underneath it all, the awareness of René's situation runs like a bass note, felt rather than heard. René is not there that evening. He is handling things. Philippe knows someone who can help. The situation, it is believed, will resolve. The former lover will be dealt with. The letters will be, if not destroyed, at least contained. Afterward, walking home with Gabriel through the January cold, You ask what happens if it doesn't resolve. Gabriel's quiet for a longer time than usual. Then everything adjusts, he says. René's family, his position, the visible life. Everything adjusts. And him? Gabriel looks at you. Some men leave Paris, he says, go south, go abroad. Some men? He stops. Some men don't manage it well, he says. That's what I'm saying. You walk in silence for a while. This is the other thing about this world. Alongside the rooms and the conversations and the specific relief of being among people who know, alongside Verlaine on the settee, and Henri Delamare naming the literary magazines and the card from Philippe in your pocket, alongside all of it. This. The blackmail. The letters. The situations that resolve badly. The mechanism of consequence that the city deploys against people who are too visible or too unlucky, or whose past reached too far into their present. Oscar Wilde is in London this January. You have read his essays and his novel, which was published last year and received with the predictable mixture of fascination and anxiety that greeted anything Wilde produced. He is celebrated and mocked in equal measure, the target of a kind of hostility that is enjoyable to its practitioners because it operates under the cover of aesthetic criticism. His writing is too ornate, his positions are too contrary, his presence is too much. He is too much, but he hasn't been taken down yet. The disaster is still 5 years away. The prosecution and the prison, the complete machinery of legal and social destruction that will be brought to bear against him in 1895 for exactly what he is. You don't know that. Nobody knows that. He's still the celebrated Wilde, the cleverest man in the room, writing his plays and his essays and coming to Paris to be appreciated by people who find London too provincial. You read about him sometimes and feel something complicated. The green carnation is his signal too. He made it famous. Part of you feels pride in his visibility, the refusal to hide that he performs so extravagantly. Part of you feels fear on his behalf, the fear of watching someone stand very close to a drop without quite seeming to notice it. There is a version of this life that is all the room, and the conversations and the beauty. And there is the version that includes what happens when the room is not available, when the outside world intrudes, when the letters exist and the mechanisms of ruin are engaged. You're trying to understand how to live in both versions simultaneously. René's situation resolves eventually. The money changes hands. The letters are, if not destroyed, at least paid for. René comes back to Philippe's salon in February looking somewhat thinner and more exhausted but present. He drinks wine. He contributes to the conversation about symbolism. His face has the particular set of someone who has passed through something and knows they might have to pass through something like it again. You look at him across the table and think, this is also what belonging looks like. Not just the good evenings, the evenings after the bad things too, the people who are still in the room. February in Paris is the nadir of winter. The cold is at its most settled and determined, the grey light at its most uniform. The streets are muddy from rain that cannot quite become snow. The Seine is high and fast. Everyone in the city looks slightly worn down, as if winter has been doing its specific work on them and they have decided to simply wait it out. You go to the Louvre more in February. The warmth of it, partly. The presence of things that have survived winter by the thousands of years. The Dutch masters in their galleries, with their light. You go to see Verlaine read. He reads twice in February, at a gathering in the 5th arrondissement, in a bookshop whose owner has the inspired eccentricity to host literary evenings on Thursday nights and seats everyone on the piles of boxes and crates that fill the back of the shop when the chairs run out. It is not a large space, perhaps 40 people, crammed together, breath visible in the cold air because the small stove at the back is not adequate to the space. Verlaine reads for 40 minutes. He stands at the front of the room with a scrap of paper that he barely looks at, reading from memory, the poems coming out of him with the fluency of things that have been lived with so long they have become part of the body's language. He reads the ariettes, he reads some of the romances, he reads a newer poem, recent, that has the quality of all his best work, the sound like music, the feeling like a key fitting a lock you didn't know you had. The room is absolutely still when he reads. The 40 people crammed into the bookshop, on chairs and boxes and standing against walls, are not moving. The cold is not noticed. There is just the voice and the poems and the particular feeling of language doing what it is supposed to do, finding the true thing and saying it. When he finishes, there is a silence and then applause that fills the small room completely. You applaud. Your hands are cold and they hurt slightly from clapping hard, and you do not notice this until afterward. You're standing near the back of the room, against the shelf of travel books because you came late. From where you're standing you can see the whole room, the backs of people's heads, the set of their bodies, the particular attention that they paid. You see the young man in the front row who is weeping, not dramatically but simply because something has broken through the particular undefended state that very good art produces sometimes in people who are ready for it. You see Verlaine accepting the applause with the expression of a man who is glad and tired and somewhere else simultaneously. He looks for a moment at the ceiling of the shop, as if checking for something. Then he looks back at the room, and the expression is just gladness. You go home that night and you write. Not for publication, for yourself. Trying to write what Verlaine's reading felt like, what the room felt like, what 40 people in a cold bookshop sharing a language felt like. You write 3 pages before the candle gets low and your hand cramps and you stop. You read back what you wrote and it is not good yet, but it is honest. It is the true thing, approximately. You are getting closer. The piece in Les Cahiers de Paris publishes in March. Your name on the table of contents, Edouard Pelletier, in the small serif typeface that the magazine uses. 3,000 words about Montmartre, about the view from the But, about the way a neighbourhood that is almost a village but is swallowed by a city feels, about the specific quality of existing at the border of things. You buy 3 copies from the newsstand near the opera. You send one to your parents with a letter saying that you have had a piece published in a small literary magazine, which you hope demonstrates the progress of your ambitions. You keep one. You give one to Armand Leclerc at the next dinner, who reads it standing in the entry hall and says when he finishes, "Very good." And then, "Write more of this." He says this in the specific way of someone who means it, not the way of someone performing appreciation. You write more of this. Spring comes to Paris. Spring in Paris is worth all the winters. The city, which has been compressed by cold and grey light, and the general atmosphere of endurance opens. The trees along the boulevards go from bare to budding, to leafed, in the space of what seems like a week. The terraces of the cafés appear, folded tables and chairs that have been stored through winter suddenly occupying the pavements. The light changes, becomes warmer and more horizontal, the afternoon light hitting the stone facades of the Haussmann buildings in a way that turns them to gold. People stop wearing the compressed posture of winter and stand up straighter. You walk more, everywhere. Paris is a city made for walking, which is something you have been discovering since you arrived, but which becomes fully clear in the spring, when the weather allows it and the streets reward it. The city is organized in a way that produces, if you walk it enough, a kind of knowledge that is different from the knowledge of maps or descriptions. You come to know it the way you know a person, by their moods and habits, and the way they look in different lights. You know the Rue de Bac in the early morning with the market and the cold. You know the boulevard de Clichy on a Saturday night. You know the gardens of the Palais Royal in the afternoon, the covered arcades with their bookshops and their chess players and their permanent quality of existing slightly outside of time. You know the Ile Saint-Louis, which has the quality of a very small city that has been inserted into the middle of a larger one and is trying not to draw attention to itself. You know the Marais, with its old aristocratic architecture still standing from before the Revolution, the centuries-old hotels particuliers now divided into apartments and workshops, the past and the present in conversation across the same stones. You know certain cafés in the 6th arrondissement that are, on certain afternoons, frequented by certain people who sit with their backs to the wall and their faces toward the room, and their conversations pitched at a volume that carries only to the next chair. You know the covered passages, the galleries and passages that thread through the 2nd and 9th arrondissements, glass-roofed arcades built in the first half of the century, now slightly old-fashioned since Haussmann's boulevards replaced the need for them as thoroughfares, but still existing as their own kind of world, warm and lit and full of specialist shops and eccentrics, and the feeling of being inside something that the city's official organization has forgotten about. The Galerie Vivienne, with its intricate mosaic floors and its smell of old paper from the bookshop that has been there for decades. The Passage des Panoramas, with its stamp dealers and its print sellers. The Passage Jouffroy, with the wax museum at one end and the toy shop at the other, and a hotel in the middle that does not ask too many questions, which is useful to some people and irrelevant to others. You spend Sunday afternoons in these passages sometimes, reading, watching, being in a covered space that is neither inside nor outside, neither public nor private, in the interstice between categories that Paris is full of, and that you have come to understand as essential to how the city functions. Paris survives on its interstices, on the spaces between the official categories, between the respectable and the disreputable, between the public and the private, between what is said and what is meant. This city is made of these spaces as much as it is made of stone. You write about the passages. You write about the ways cities hold their secrets in their architecture, in the physical structures that exist between the designated structures. Les Cahiers de Paris publishes it. Henri Delamare reads it and says, over wine at Philippe's Salons, "You're finding your thing. What's my thing?" The interior, he says, the Paris that isn't on the postcards. You think about that. You have been in Paris for 18 months now. You're no longer a newcomer, though you're not yet whatever the opposite of newcomer is, the word for someone who has accumulated enough of a city that they can navigate it without looking at the map. You're somewhere in between, which is, you have come to think, perhaps where you will always be, between Bordeaux and Paris, between the interior life and the exterior one, between the world that knows and the world that does not. Between is a livable place. You are learning this. Armand's salon in April has a particular evening, one that you will return to in memory many times in the years ahead. It is late April, warm enough that the windows in the drawing room are open for the first time since autumn, and Paris is audible from the street below, the evening version of the city, and the air that comes in with it is the extraordinary Paris spring air, cool and carrying the smell of the trees and the wet stone. There are perhaps 25 people at the dinner. Verlaine is there, Philippe Girard is there, Henri Delamare is there. There are people you don't know, including a man who has just returned from London, who has been at a gathering at which Oscar Wilde was present, and who is full of the specific animation of a person bringing fresh news from a distant place. Wilde, the man reports, is very much himself. He's working on something new, a play, which he expects will be produced next year. He is also, the man says, being wild, which requires no further elaboration for a room like this, and the way he says it produces a ripple of understanding that goes around the table. Someone asks, does he not worry? The man who returned from London looks thoughtful. He worries, he says. Everyone worries. But Wilde's specific genius is that he has converted his worrying into performance. The worry becomes the wit. The danger becomes the show. He has decided on some level that the way to survive what he is to be so much of it that nobody can pretend it isn't real. A silence around the table. Is that wise? Someone asks. Probably not, the man says, but it's magnificent. The conversation moves. But you keep thinking about this. The decision to be so much of a thing that nobody can pretend it isn't real. The specific bravery of that, or the specific recklessness. The way Wilde's green carnation is not hidden at all, but very present, very deliberate, daring the world to pretend it doesn't know what it means. You touch your own lapel, where your own carnation would be if you were wearing one tonight. You are not. This is an indoor evening, and you have not developed the habit of wearing it inside. You think about the difference between Wilde's visibility and your own invisibility. The way one person's approach to the same problem can be so radically different from another's. Wilde performs his way through. You navigate your way through. Both strategies have costs and benefits. Both involve a relationship to the world's gaze that is, at its root, a response to the same fundamental condition, being a person who is not what the world expects. You do not think one approach is right and the other wrong. You think they are different responses to a problem that has no clean solution. But you think about Wilde's approach with something that is not quite envy, but is its close neighbour. The freedom of that, however dangerous. Dinner is served. The conversation continues. At the table over the soup, Verlaine is in a reflective mood. This happens sometimes. His evenings at Armand's run the range of his moods, and tonight he is quiet and observational rather than expansive. He eats his soup and listens to the conversations around him with the attention of a man who has been recording things all his life and cannot stop. You're seated near him, not next to him, but close enough to catch fragments. You catch him looking at the windows, at the April night outside, with an expression you now recognise on his face. Not sadness exactly, something more complex. The expression of a person who has lived so much and processed all of it into words and is still, at 56, surrounded by the material of more things to say. He catches you looking. He holds your gaze for a moment with a directness that is somehow comfortable rather than challenging. You're writing, he says. It's not quite a question. Yes. He nods. Keep going, he says. It's the only thing that helps. He returns to his soup. You return to yours. May arrives. With May comes something that the entire city has been anticipating, in one way or another, since it was announced 2 years ago. The Exposition Universelle closed last year, but its physical remnants are still transforming the city. The Eiffel Tower still standing despite the predictions of many that would be removed after the exposition closed. It is there. It dominates the Champ de Mars. It is slowly, reluctantly, being accepted as a permanent feature of the Paris skyline, which means the arguments about it have shifted from whether it should exist to what it means that it does. You go to see it properly for the first time on a Sunday in May. You've seen it, of course, from the hill, from a distance, from the edges of your walks. But on this Sunday you walk to the Champ de Mars and stand beneath it. It is enormous. This seems like an insufficient observation for something so considerable, but it is the immediate experience, the sheer scale of it, the way it rises 300 meters into the May sky, the lattice of iron becoming finer and more intricate the higher your eye goes, until at the very top it is filigree against the blue. Gustave Eiffel completed it in 1889. At the time of construction, it was the tallest man-made structure in the world, taller than the Washington Monument, taller than the great cathedrals. It held this title for 41 years, until the Chrysler Building went up in New York, which is something none of you know yet in 1890. You stand beneath it and look up and feel, as you often feel in the presence of things of genuinely extreme scale, a slight loosening of the self, the particular sensation of your own smallness in relation to something that has nothing to do with you. Around you, other people are looking up in the same way. There is a kind of communion in communal awe, in the shared experience of standing beneath something too big to take in and trying to take it in anyway. You think about what Verlaine said at the bookshop, the true thing. You think about the tower as an attempt to say something true, an argument made in iron, an insistence that beauty and function do not have to be opposed, that a structure can be purely utilitarian and purely aesthetic simultaneously. You think about the life you're building, in this city, in this year, in these rooms, the way it is both structural and aesthetic, both practical and interior, the way the hidden world and the visible world are not opposed but layered, the way the tower's iron lattice is both skeleton and surface. You're 23 years old and you are standing in the shadow of the tallest structure in the world on a May morning in Paris and thinking about how to live. This is, you think, as good a place as any to do that. The spring advances, the social world advances. You have now been going to Armand's salon for 6 months, and you have, in that time, learned more about this particular territory of human life than in all the years before combined. Not the grand theory of it, not the politics or the philosophy, the practical cartography, the specific knowledge of how people like you live in cities, what they do and how they do it, and what it costs them and what it gives them. You have learned, for instance, that there are more women in this world than you initially understood. The 3 women at Armand's first dinner, who you noticed but didn't fully account for, are part of a separate but adjacent territory, a world of women who love women, who also navigate the coded existence, who have their own salons and their own languages and their own versions of the same problems. Mathilde Cordier, who publishes as Monsieur Cordier, invites you to tea one afternoon in May and spends 3 hours explaining to you, in the oblique way but with increasing directness as the afternoon advances, the geography from her side of it. We are parallel, she says, not the same, but parallel. She is 30, with dark eyes, and the manner of someone who has decided, after considerable deliberation, exactly how she is going to be in the world and intends to be that way without apology. Her companion is named Louise, and is a school teacher in the 14th arrondissement, and has the particular quietly fierce quality of a woman who has arranged her life with precision around the things that matter to her, and has not explained this arrangement to anyone. We lose more than you do, Matilda says, when things go wrong. A woman without a man is already a subject of, she pauses, concern, interference. Add this, she means this in the specific sense, the thing they are talking about around and not through, and the machinery of consequence is different, more total. You listen. But we also, she says, have something you don't quite have. We can live together, a woman and her dear friend, her companion, her housemate. Nobody thinks anything. The intimacy can be in plain sight because women's intimacy is not perceived as dangerous. She says this with a complicated expression that is partly irony and partly something more pointed. We are visible in our invisibility, she says, which is its own form of hiding and its own form of freedom and its own form of exhaustion. She refills your tea. I tell you this because, she says, the world we're describing, the one that contains Armand's dinner and Philippe's salon and all the rest, it contains us too in our parallel version of it, and I think it's important that you know that this isn't only about men, that the condition is wider than you might see from inside it. You think about this for a long time afterward. June. Something happens in June that is small in itself, but which shifts the way you understand your situation. You're at the Journal Illustré, late afternoon, finishing a piece about a new photographic exhibition. Bernard has already left. Fléchard is in his office with the door closed, which usually means he is writing, which usually means he wants not to be disturbed. You're at your desk, which is near the window, and the late June light is falling through the glass in long diagonals that turn the dust motes in the air to gold, and you're almost finished with the piece, which has been giving you trouble because it is essentially about beauty, and it is difficult to write about beauty without sounding either breathless or cold, and you are trying for something that is neither. Fléchard's door opens. He comes out with a manuscript in his hand and sets it on your desk. A review from a contributor. He wants it edited by morning. He says this and goes to get his coat, and then he stops. He looks at you for a moment. You've been sending pieces to Cahiers de Paris, he says. It is not a question. He has read them, or read about them, or someone has mentioned them to him. You feel the specific internal alertness of a person who has been noticed in a context they didn't expect. Yes, you say. He considers the manuscript in your hands, considers you. Good, he says, keep doing it. He picks up his hat and leaves. You sit with the manuscript in your hands for a moment, thinking about good, thinking about keep doing it. Fléchard, who says good once a day and considers this adequate, has just offered you his version of significant encouragement. You understand the scale of this. You understand that this means he has read the pieces and considers them worth writing, which for Fléchard is nearly the same as saying they are excellent. You go back to the photographic exhibition piece, and you write it the way you wanted to write it. The interior way, the way that says something true about what beauty does to a person when they let it in. And it is the best thing you have written for the journal, and you know this as you write it, which almost never happens. You file it. You go home. That evening you write in your room until the candle burns low, not for publication, for yourself, about the 14 months, about the door and the room and Verlaine on the settee, about the winter and the passages and the Eiffel Tower on the May morning, about Mathilde's tea and what she said about parallel worlds, about the specific quality of trying to say the true thing in a city that runs on the management of impression. You write about Bordeaux, which you haven't thought about directly in months, the way the town looks from the hill above it, the river there, the Garonne, which is wide and brown and magnificent in its own way, different from the Seine. the house you grew up in, your mother at the piano on Sunday afternoons, the boy you were before Paris, before the understanding that came with Paris, before the room on the Rue de Bac and the green carnation and the parallel world running underneath the official one. You do not know what to do with what you write. It is too personal for any magazine, too specific, too close to the real names of the real things. But you keep it. You put it in the folder with the other private writing, the things written for no one but yourself, the interior record. You blow out the candle and lie in the dark and listen to the Rue de Bac in its late June version, which is louder than winter and warmer, and smells of open windows and distant cooking, and the particular heated dust smell of city streets in summer. You have been in Paris for nearly a year and a half. You have been in Paris for what is beginning to feel like your life. Summer. Paris in July and August does a strange thing. Half the city leaves. The wealthy leave for their country estates, for the coast, for the spas. The fashionable leave for wherever fashion has decided is fashionable that year. Businesses close for weeks. The streets have a different quality, a lower density, as if the city has exhaled. What remains is the Paris of the people who cannot leave, the workers, the shopkeepers, the artists who cannot afford the coast, the students who have nowhere else to be. The city becomes, in a curious way, more itself in summer. The performance has departed with the audience. What's left is the infrastructure of the place, doing what it does without the pressure of being observed. You stay. Of course you stay. You have a position to maintain, a salary to collect, and in any case Paris in summer has a quality you have come to love, the hot pavements and the shade of the gardens and the river with its particular summer smell, and the light that stays until 9 in the evening and turns the whole city golden. The Salon evenings continue at a reduced frequency. Armand is away for part of July. Philippe stays through the summer, but his gatherings are smaller. A handful of people in the heat, the windows open, the conversations longer and more diffuse. You go. You drink wine and talk. You are comfortable in these rooms in a way that you were not 6 months ago. Renée has returned to normal, or to the version of normal that follows having been through something, which includes a careful quiet and a renewed attention to which letters are written down and which are kept only in the mind. He talks about his work more than before the situation. He talks about the painting he is doing, a series of riverscapes that are coming out well, and which he is putting into an exhibition in the autumn. He talks about the future. You recognize this in him. The recalibration, the way a close call reshapes what you value and how you hold it. The way the thing that almost ruined him has, in its resolution, produced a clarity that he didn't have before. He says to you one August evening, when the two of you are the last people at Philippe's salon and you're sharing a bottle of wine and the hot night is coming through the open windows, I think I thought the situation was the worst thing that could happen. And then I thought, if it had gone the other way, what would I have lost? And the answer was, everything I care about most. The painting, the evenings, the people, this. He gestures, which means this world, this room, these connections. And I thought, the most important things are real. They're mine, regardless of what that man tried to do with his letters. He cannot touch the most important things. He drinks. That's worth knowing, he says, even if the way you find it out is terrible. You sit with that. You think about Verlaine's room where the thinking doesn't cost you something every time. You think about what it would mean to lose it. The evenings, the conversations, the specific texture of being in a room where the performance is suspended. The people, Gabrielle, Philippe, Henri, Armand, Mathilde and Louise, René, the rotating cast of others who move through these rooms, the painters and the writers and the theatre critics and the composers, the people who are building their lives in the interstices of the city. These people, whatever else happens with the exterior life, with the position at the journal and the correspondence and Fléchard's small red corrections and your father's monthly letters, whatever calibrations and management the outer life requires, these people are real. You've not been alone for 4 months. The autumn comes back around. A year since the first dinner on the Rue de Bac. Paris in autumn 1891. You are 24 years old. You have published 7 pieces in Les Cahiers de Paris, and 2 in other small magazines, and 1 longer essay in a literary quarterly that Henri Delamare introduced you to. An essay about the covered passages, about the interstices, about the spaces between official categories where life actually happens. The essay is the best thing you've written. It takes up 8 pages in the quarterly and is written in the voice you've been developing for a year. The interior voice, the one that says something true about experience rather than something correct about things. Fléchard gives you more to do. He gives you the photographic beat regularly, which means attending exhibitions and writing about what photography is doing to the way we see the world, which is exactly the kind of question you want to be writing about. He gives you 2 column inches every week for a piece he calls Notes from the City, which is Fléchard's way of saying write your interior Paris without saying that. Because Fléchard cannot bring himself to describe anything in terms that might be called aesthetically programmatic. You're not a secretary who writes occasional pieces anymore. You're a writer who also does some secretarial work. The distinction is interior, invisible to anyone else, but it is real. You're living 2 lives, which has been true since Bordeaux, and which you have been negotiating the costs and benefits of for as long as you can remember. But the 2 lives are both more fully themselves now than they were a year ago. The exterior life is better. The interior life is real. The management of the boundary between them is more practiced, more efficient, less draining. You are not unafraid. You will never be unafraid. René's situation, resolved as it was, left a permanent layer of awareness underneath your days. The knowledge that the machinery of consequence exists, that it is ready to be deployed, that it requires only an accident or a malicious person, or a moment of insufficient caution to engage. This knowledge lives in you the way cold lives in a building's stones. It warms when the days are good, but it does not leave. But you're not only afraid. This is the thing you're learning. The fear is real, and the life is real, and both of these things are true simultaneously, and the task is not to resolve them, but to carry them, to live inside both of them without letting either one consume the other. Armand says it at a dinner in October, the anniversary of your first evening, though you do not mark the anniversary explicitly. You survive Paris by being more than one thing at once. The city is many things at once. It accepts you on the same terms. You survive Paris by being more than one thing at once. You write this down, not for publication, for yourself. October deepens into November. Your second Parisian winter begins its slow approach, the light changing, the cold coming back in stages, the chestnut sellers returning to their corners. You're walking home one evening the long way, along the river, when you stop on the bridge and look at the city, Notre Dame on its island, the Ile de la Cité rising from the black water, the towers of the cathedral grey in the failing light, the rose window a dim disk of colour that will be invisible in another few minutes, the spire which Viollet-le-Duc rebuilt in the 1840s because the medieval one had been removed, now rising above the rest, needle-thin, with its copper statues of the apostles and evangelists looking outward from the base of it. 800 years. 2 years after you leave this city or this world, a fire will consume the cathedral's spire and roof, and the world will watch it burn on devices you cannot imagine. The spire will fall. The people who see it will feel, watching, the specific grief of something that seemed permanent becoming temporary. But the stone will survive. The walls, the nave, the great rose windows, it will be rebuilt. The medieval heart of it will still be there, but you do not know that. Standing on the bridge in November 1891, the cathedral is simply the cathedral, enormous and present. The most ancient thing in a city of ancient things, the weight of its 8 centuries settling into the river water below it. You've been in Paris for 2 years, approximately. 2 years and 3 months. You are 24 years old and you are writing things that are true, and you are part of a world that exists inside the city, and you are more alone than most people know, and less alone than you were before, and the river is moving below you, and the night is coming, and the gas lights are being lit one by one along the embankment. The gas lights are one of the things that will go. You don't know this either. Within 15 years, electricity will have replaced them throughout most of the city. The gas flame will be replaced by the electric bulb, which will burn cleaner and more steadily, and will make the city's nights a different, colder kind of bright. Something will be lost when that happens. The warmth of the gas light, the way it moves, the gold of it on wet stones, the way it makes the city's nighttime version of itself something specific and particular, a Paris at night rather than just everywhere lit. But for now, the gas lights are lit. Paris lights itself. The gas lights come on along the embankment and along the streets and up the hill to Montmartre, where the construction lamps on the Sacré-Cœur burn through the night. The city does not go dark. It transforms instead into something more concentrated and more beautiful, the way certain truths become clearer in the dark than they are in the full light, the way the essential structure of things reveals itself when the surface noise is quieted. You stand on the bridge for a long time. The cold is real, and the city is real, and the world inside the world is real, and the things you have built here in 2 years are real. The friendships, and the writing, and the knowledge, and the specific accumulated understanding of how to be a person in this place, in this life, with all its layers, real enough. You push off the bridge railing and walk north, home, up through the city, past the opera, past the boulevards, up into Montmartre, up the Rue de Bac, past the market that has packed away for the evening, past the windows where the candles and lamps are burning in the apartments, all the individual lives behind the glass, each one its own complete world that you will never know. The Rue de Bac, your building, the door. Madame Rochard's cat on the landing, its expression unchanged by the passage of seasons. Your room, the lamp, the books. The Baudelaire on the shelf, with behind it Verlaine, with behind that the folder of private writing, thickened now with 2 years of true things, building up like sediment. The card from Philippe's first salon still on the table. You have other cards now, other names and addresses, the cartography of the interior world accumulated over 2 years. Your desk, your pen. The lamp's gold light on the white paper. You sit down and begin to write. You're writing about 2 years of Paris, about the room on the Rue de Bac and the green carnation, about Verlaine and the bookshop and the true thing, about the river at midnight and the Eiffel Tower on the May morning, about the passages and their interstitial world, about the knowledge that the machinery of consequence exists and moves, about the specific weight of living a doubled life and the specific relief of the rooms where the doubling suspends. You write the interior Paris, the one not on the postcards, the one that exists in the spaces between the official categories, the one that's made of people who need a space to breathe in, who have decided for the duration of their evenings to set down the performance. You write until the lamp burns low. You write until your hand cramps and you have to put the pen down and stretch your fingers, feeling the ache of them, the specific protest of a body that has been working steadily and wants rest. You light a new candle. You read back what you wrote. It is the truest thing you have written yet. You blow out the lamp and sit in the candlelight for a while, reading, making marks, thinking. Outside, the Rue de Bac settles into its late-night version. The last café closing somewhere, a dog doing something at a distance, the faint rhythm of construction, even at night, even in November, the Sacré-Cœur accumulating its white stone in the darkness above the city. You close the notebook. You are warm enough, fed enough, present enough, the specific enough of a life that is incomplete and real and yours. You blow out the candle. The room goes dark. You lie down in your coat over the blankets and listen to the city's nighttime breathing. There will be more evenings on the Rue de Bac, more dinners at Armand's, more gatherings at Philippe's, more coffee with Gabriel, more tea with Mathilde, more pieces written and published, more of the interior Paris put into words for people to find if they know how to read them, more of Verlaine's poems, read in cold bookshops and warm drawing rooms, the language reaching for the true thing and sometimes finding it. There will be hard things too. There are always hard things. The mechanisms of the world do not stop simply because you have figured out how to live inside it. Renee knows this. You know it. Anyone who has spent time in the interior Paris, the real one, knows the cost of being there. But the evenings are real. The room where the thinking doesn't cost you something every time is real. The people in it are real. Gabriel and Philippe and Henri and Armand and Mathilde and Renee and the others. The network of lives running underneath the official city, parallel and present and their own complete world. 2 years. 2 years of learning the language, of building the map, of writing the true thing and getting closer each time. The future is dark. This is always true, which is either terrifying or reassuring depending on what you do with the knowledge. You know things now that you did not know when you arrived from Bordeaux with 30 francs and a reference letter, and everything you owned that you were willing to be seen with. You know the city. You know its passages and its riverbanks and its mornings and its nights. You know Montmartre in every season, the mist and the heat and the cold, the construction hammering on the basilica, the gaslights on the wet stones. You know the room. You know what it is to walk into a room where the performance is suspended, where you can set down the weight of it, where the thinking doesn't cost you something every time. You know what that weight is because you know what the absence of it feels like. You know the specific relief of it. And you know something else. Something that has accumulated slowly over 2 years of living the doubled life. Something that Armand was pointing at when he said, "You survive Paris by being more than one thing at once." You are more than one thing. You are the correspondent at the journal, correct and efficient, who drafts letters and writes exhibition reviews and receives small red corrections from Fléchard. You're the writer in Le Cahier de Paris and the Literary Quarterly, feeling his way toward the interior truth. You're the young man from Bordeaux who sends reassuring letters to his father, and listens to his mother's piano on the rare visits home. You are the person who walks into rooms on the Rue de Bac and sets down the performance. You are the friend of Gabrielle, the occasional dinner companion of Verlaine, the student of Henri Delamare, the fellow traveller of Mathilde and Louise and Renée. You are all of these things simultaneously. None of them is the whole truth. All of them are real. The city holds them all. That is what cities are for. That is what Paris is for. The candle has gone out. The room is completely dark. Outside, the city continues its nighttime life. The gas lights on the Rue de Bac burning. The distant hammering on the Sacré-Cœur, adding its white stone one block at a time to the unfinished thing on the hill. The river, invisible but present, moving through the city the way it has always moved, carrying the light's reflections south to the sea. All the rooms in all the buildings in all the arrondissements, each one a complete world, each one containing a life that is its own complete thing, each one part of the vast simultaneous complexity of the city. And in this one, you, 24 years old, 2 years in Paris, writer, correspondent, carrier of the interior life, student of the coded language, survivor, so far, of the cost of being what you are in a world that requires management, and recipient also of what the world where no management is required can give: the room, the evenings, the conversations that cost nothing to have, the specific weight of belonging, set down on a table on the Rue de Bac on an October evening a year ago and not yet fully picked back up. It is enough. For now, for tonight, in this room, in this city, it is enough. Let the city carry on around you. Let the gaslights burn. Let the construction continue on the hill, the white stone accumulating in the dark. Let the river move through the city the way it always has. Let the room be what it is, your room, your life, this particular version of this particular existence, in this particular city, in this particular year. Let sleep come. It has earned its claim. You have earned your rest. The sounds of the Rue de Bac fade. The city's breathing slows, or you stop hearing it. The darkness is complete and warm and entirely uncomplicated. Somewhere down the hill a church bell marks the hour. You are too close to sleep to count the strokes. Paris breathes. You breathe with it. And then you stop hearing anything at all. The years that will follow this night are already happening, somewhere in the irreversible future. Wilde's disaster, 1895. The Dreyfus affair tearing the country apart. The end of the Belle Époque in ways that no one will see coming, and everyone will understand in retrospect. The century turning, new movements, new languages, new ways of being in cities and being in life. Proust, writing his enormous novel about time and memory and desire and the interior life, writing it in a cork-lined room against the noise of a world that will change completely by the time he finishes. The Sacré-Cœur will be completed. The Eiffel Tower will stay. The city will electrify. The gaslights will go. But people will still come to Paris from the provinces with their reference letters and their hope. And they will still look for the rooms within the rooms, the world within the world, the spaces where the performance suspends and the thinking does not cost you something every time. They will find them. They will always find them in this city and the cities that learn from it. Because the need for those rooms is as old as the need to live in cities, which is as old as human beings deciding that together is better than alone, even when together is complicated and costly, and requires the constant management of a doubled life. Some things do not change. The interior life does not change. The need for it, the need to say the true thing, to find the language for the true thing, To be in a room where the true thing can be said without the cost of saying it. You are asleep. The city keeps going. Somewhere on the Rue de Bac, a cart is making its way in the pre-dawn dark, the wheels on the cobblestones making their slow drum roll. The vegetable sellers are beginning. The day's machinery is warming up, the city preparing to reassemble itself into its daytime version. In a few hours you will wake to the bells. You will wash your face in cold water, break the thin ice with your knuckle, dress quickly against the cold. You will walk down from Montmartre, past the market, through the city, to the office on the Rue Saint-Joseph. You will draft correspondence. You will write, eventually, the next true thing. This is the life. This is Paris. This is enough. Good night.